Hey there guys, this is Ian. I'm just doing a quick review here. So I wanted to talk about some of my favorite comedy TV shows. So I think two of the most well-known ones are definitely The Office and Parks and Rec. But if I were to put my money on a favorite, it's definitely Parks and Rec. But that's something I can talk about in a different video. Right now I wanted to talk about 5 different TV shows that also are very comedic and some of my favorites. And so I'm just going to do very quick looks at each of them. Alright, so here we go. So the first TV show I'm going to talk about is something that predated both The Office and Parks and Rec by just a few years, and that is Scrubs. So Scrubs is a sitcom, not necessarily in the mockumentary style, but it's very short, 20-minute episodes. And I think the best thing about it is that it doesn't take itself too seriously at times. Like, it can go into that serious realm, especially when it's talking about serious subjects like death or loss or not knowing where you are. But Scrubs always ties it back to comedy. And so it can tell real stories while using that comedic element to help people be entertained and engage with the story. So it follows people that work at Sacred Heart Hospital, and it really is a medical show. A lot of the stuff is based in real life medical facts or based on stories, but that's not the real focus. The focus is on the characters and the comedic elements, using the hospital as a place to do that. So I highly recommend it. It does run a bit long, about the same amount of time as both Parks and Rec and The Office. Also, for those of you that are interested, season 9 was supposed to be a spin-off, and so it's not really a season that's connected fully to it. A lot of people say it's the season 9, but if you view it as a spin-off, the show is definitely better. Alright, so the next show I'm going to talk about is one that I'm pretty sure that a lot of you know about. It's Arrested Development. So Arrested Development is a fantastic show. It really paved the way for both The Office and Parks and Rec and all the other mockumentary shows out there. So it's not quite the same. There's a narrator that goes through and narrates things, and so it's a very peculiar style, but it's also very distinct when you compare it to everybody else. So the thing I like about Arrested Development the most is the characters in there. So you have a fantastic cast. Most of these people got famous after being on the show in the early 2000s. So you have Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Michael Cera, a whole bunch of other people. David Cross, how did I forget him? But all of these people are fantastic in the show. And it was really underrated when it first started. So it ran for 3 seasons in the early 2000s before being canceled. There's a season 4 and a season 5 on Netflix right now, which are not as good as the first 3, but they're worth a look, especially if you have Netflix. Just know that they're not as good as the first 3 seasons. What I like about this show is how the cast just combines together. And so this is straight up comedy all the way. Everything is absolutely hilarious. The one thing that I have a problem with is I sometimes get secondhand anxiety, and so I feel embarrassed with what people are doing on screen. And so I get this with The Office as well, especially in the mid-seasons. For Arrested Development, it really happens in season 3 for me, where there's some plots where I just get so embarrassed that it's very hard to watch. So if you have something like that, I'd be wary of especially season 3, but overall this is one of my favorite shows of all time, so I definitely recommend it. Next show is something very near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time, even higher than Arrested Development, and that is Psych. So Psych is a bit longer than all the other shows I talked about. It's a 45-minute show, and so it does take a bit of time to watch it, but I'd say that really gives you more time to get to know the characters, and the characters are fantastic. The thing that really makes this show is the dynamic duo of Sean Spencer and Burton Guster, the two main characters. So Sean, he's a detective for the Santa Barbara Police Department, but he's a psychic detective. So it's really interesting. He's hired on for cases that seem impossible to solve, or a lot of times he just stumbles upon or invites himself to crime scenes. So, if any of you have seen The Mentalist, it's kind of the same premise, but Psych is a lot funnier and, in my opinion, the better show. Psych really goes into the characters, and so they grow throughout the show, and it's one of the very few shows out there that at the end I'm like, man, I want more, which is good because they started making movies of them. So if you remember 2017, in December they came out with the first movie, and right now they're working on the second movie, so I'm really glad that they're making more stuff about it. What makes this show so funny is how those two main characters that I talked about, they really come together and play off of each other, and they're just cracking jokes nonstop. And so, especially if you know anything about pop culture, and especially 80s pop culture, you'll really get a kick out of everything. Even if you're not the most into that, you can get a lot out of it, and they make jokes across all of pop culture. But this is highly recommended for anyone that likes crime shows, especially. But this is also something for comedic fans as well. So the next show is probably a bit of a strange one to put on here because it's not necessarily a comedic show that a lot of people talk about. It's Chuck. So Chuck was a show that I feel like a lot of people liked back during the mid 2000s, late 2000s. But not a lot of people talk about it anymore, which is a real shame because it is a really funny show. Um, the premise is this guy gets the spyware into his head and he becomes a super spy because of it. So the government uses him for all these missions. But he also works at the Geek Squad at like a Best Buy type shop. And so he so he really balances those two. What makes this funny is not necessarily the main cast, but the supporting cast. Every time they're on screen, they steal the show, in my opinion. The show itself is okay when it comes to story, but it really is funny. And if you take it for what it is, which is a show, a spy show that doesn't take itself too seriously, you'll have a lot of fun with it. It ran for 5 seasons, so it's about mid length for a show in its entirety. Um, it's definitely one I would take a look at if you're someone that's interested in either spy movies, but not like the serious spy movies like Bond, but more of the fun ones. I'd highly recommend it. Okay, and the last one I'm going to talk about is kind of a dark horse in this. Not a lot of people know about it in general, and the people that do are going to be like, okay, that's an interesting pick for you to talk about. It's Eureka. So Eureka is a sci-fi show, and because of that, they have terrible CGI graphics, which I'd love to talk about in a different video later on. But that's beside the point. What I really want to talk about is the main character, Jack. So he is a former U.S. Marshal that becomes the sheriff of this town in Oregon. But this isn't any ordinary town. This is a secret government town full of all these super smart scientists. And they're making all these fantastic projects. But the problem is, they may be smart, but they can also be very, very dumb. So these experiments always go out of hand. And so it's the sheriff's job to make sure that they're kind of settled. And so with that, he kind of becomes cynical about this. He's not necessarily book smart, but he's street smart, and so he has the ability to do that. But he's always like tired of like, why am I the one to do this? Everyone's so smart. Why do I have to be the one to do that? And so there's a lot of self-deprecating humor in that, but there's also fantastic comedy in whenever he talks to Fargo, who's another fantastic character on the show, one of the scientists. And then, which is really unique to the show, he also has these fantastic conversations with his house, which sounds strange, but you have to watch the show in order to understand it, which I highly recommend. Eureka's in my top 10 favorite shows of all time. Yeah, so I definitely recommend watching that. And I mean, I'd recommend watching all of the shows that I talked about here. Several of these are in my top 10. Like Parks and Rec, Eureka, and Arrested Development are definitely top tier level. But yeah, so that was just a quick breakdown. I'd really love to talk about all these shows in depth later on. So type up in the comments if you'd love to see me do any of those later on, or any other TV shows or even movies. I definitely want to go into more detail on a lot of different things, but for right now, this is just kind of a quick video.